The sharp scent of disinfectant clung to the air, mixing with the faint aroma of coffee drifting in from the nurse's station. Monitors beeped in rhythmic patterns, carts squeaked against the wax floors, and in every corner of the ward, there was urgency. Sarah Daniels had grown used to this music of chaos, the soundtrack of her life. She had been a nurse for 10 years, and nights like this, long, frantic, and heavy with emergencies, were nothing new. But tonight, something was different. "Sarah, you okay?" A junior nurse called out, seeing Sarah lean against the counter for just a moment longer than usual. Sarah waved her off with a tired smile. Just a twinge. Probably skipped dinner again. It wasn't dinner. It was the first contraction. A deep, twisting ache low in her abdomen that made her grab the edge of the counter until her knuckles whitened. She was 36 weeks pregnant, and though she had prepared for every possible outcome for her patients, she hadn't been prepared for her own body to betray her mid-shift. The hospital was buzzing louder than usual tonight, not because of an influx of patients, but because the lobby was swarming with media. A high-profile charity fundraiser was being hosted just 2 floors down. Politicians, celebrities, and wealthy donors were parading through the hospital, shaking hands and flashing smiles, while Sarah and her colleagues worked quietly behind the scenes to keep things running. Sarah's colleague, Lydia, noticed her grimace. "Sarah, that wasn't dinner. That was a contraction. I'll finish this chart, then." "No." Lydia cut her off, already signaling 2 orderlies. "You're going to maternity. Now." Sarah tried to argue, but another contraction slammed into her like a wave, forcing her to bend forward. The decision was made. Her colleagues rushed her into a wheelchair, rolling her swiftly down the bright hallway. She caught flashes of the fundraiser guests through open doors, jewel-toned gowns, expensive tuxedos, the click of camera shutters. As they wheeled her into the maternity ward, Sarah clutched her belly, her mind racing. She had imagined this day differently. She had imagined Mark holding her hand, whispering encouragements, telling her she was strong. But Mark wasn't there. Inside the labor room, the fluorescent lights hummed. Nurses prepped her bed and checked her vitals. Sarah's breathing quickened. She wasn't afraid of pain. She'd seen too much of it to flinch. But the loneliness that pressed against her chest, that was what hurt. Her phone buzzed on the tray beside her. No message from Mark. No call. Nothing. The contraction eased, and she closed her eyes, trying to steady herself. That's when the door creaked open. At first, she thought it was another nurse. But the man who entered wore a pressed suit, not scrubs, and carried a leather briefcase instead of medical tools. His expression was apologetic, but his movements were firm, businesslike. "Mrs. Daniels?" he asked, his voice low and formal. "Yes." Sarah frowned, struggling to sit up. "I'm kind of busy here." "I understand," the man said, opening his briefcase. "I was instructed to deliver these documents to you immediately." Before Sarah could respond, another contraction tore through her body. She gritted her teeth, sweat beading along her hairline. The man set a stack of papers on the tray beside her bed with a neatly placed pen. "Divorce papers," he said simply. For a moment, the entire room went silent. The monitor beside her beeped steadily, as though mocking her shock. "What?" Sarah croaked, her voice brittle. The man cleared his throat, avoiding her eyes. "From Mr. Mark Daniels. He's requested these be signed at once. Grounds stated as irreconcilable differences. Primarily neglect of marriage due to professional commitments." Sarah blinked, stunned. "Neglect?" Her voice trembled, part anger, part disbelief. "I'm a nurse. I save lives. And he sends this? While I'm in labor." Her heart hammered in her chest, but her mind, sharp, clinical, trained to think under pressure, refused to collapse. She forced herself to take a slow breath. The man looked uncomfortable. "I was told to get your signature. I can give you privacy." "Privacy?" Sarah let out a bitter laugh that caught halfway between a sob and a scream. "You walk in here in the middle of this and hand me divorce papers, and you want to give me privacy?" She glanced at the papers, the legal language blurring through her tears. Words like irretrievable breakdown and custody stared back at her like sharp blades. Lydia returned with a chart, her eyes widening when she saw the papers. Are you kidding me? He did this now. Sarah's lips pressed together, trembling but determined. She would not fall apart, not in front of her colleagues, not in front of this messenger, and certainly not from Mark. The next contraction ripped through her body, and she clutched the rail of the bed, groaning. Between ragged breaths, she whispered, "Tell Mark, he's not breaking me." She didn't sign. Not yet. But in that moment, she made a choice. If Mark wanted to turn her labor into his battlefield, then she would fight back, but not the way he expected. The contraction subsided, leaving her sweaty and pale, but resolute. She looked at the papers again. Her heart ached, but her mind was already racing, planning, calculating, seeing beyond this humiliation. Sarah Daniels wasn't just a nurse. She wasn't just a woman in labor. She was about to become something Mark could never imagine. And she wasn't going down quietly. The sound of polished shoes echoed before he even appeared. Mark Daniels didn't rush into the hospital. He strolled in like a man arriving for a board meeting. His navy suit was pressed to perfection, his tie silk, his cufflinks gleaming under the fluorescent lights. He looked like the picture of success, every inch the corporate lawyer who lived to control the room. Only this wasn't a courtroom. It was his wife's hospital room, where Sarah lay in labor. "Mark!" Sarah's voice cracked when she saw him at the doorway. For a fleeting second, some part of her still hoped he'd come to hold her hand, to whisper that everything would be all right, that he'd been cruel to send papers, but maybe, just maybe, he was here to apologize. But his face held none of that. Instead, it was cold, calculated. "I just need your signature, Sarah," Mark said smoothly, his tone absent of warmth. "The sooner this is done, the sooner we can move forward. It's best for both of us." Sarah gripped the bed rail, fury and heartbreak warring inside her. "Move forward? I'm giving birth to your child, Mark. And you're here about paperwork?" Mark's lips curled into a half smirk, the kind that always made juries uneasy and opponents fold. "It's just business, Sarah. You've made your career more important than this marriage for years. I'm simply formalizing what's already true." Before Sarah could answer, the muffled hum of voices outside grew louder. The fundraiser downstairs had spilled into chaos. Word had traveled fast. Reporters, paparazzi, and even guests from a charity gala were pushing toward the maternity ward. Cameras flashed through the small window in the door. "Mark," Lydia hissed, stepping in front of Sarah like a shield. "This is insane. She's in labor. You need to leave." But Mark didn't leave. He adjusted his tie, relishing the attention. In his world, bad press was better than no press. And in this moment, he was orchestrating the perfect public narrative. A husband ending a marriage with clean, clinical efficiency while painting himself as the victim of neglect. The door burst open, and suddenly the room was flooded with chaos. Reporters shoved microphones forward, cameras flashed like lightning, and hospital staff shouted for order. "Mrs. Daniels, is it true your husband is divorcing you while you're in labor? Mark, do you have a statement for the press?" Sarah's chest tightened. The humiliation burned hotter than the contractions. She wanted to scream, to throw the papers back in his smug face. But then, something inside her shifted. Her aunt's voice echoed in her memory. The woman had been brilliant, eccentric, and ruthless in business, yet soft only with Sarah. "Never let them see you break," her aunt had once whispered. "Power isn't loud, it's composure." Sarah inhaled shakily. Her hands trembled as she reached for the pen, but her gaze steadied, pinning Mark with eyes sharper than he remembered. "You want to show, Mark?" Her voice was quiet but strong, audible over the frenzy. "Fine, let's give them one." With tears glistening on her cheeks, she signed the divorce papers. The cameras went wild, the shutters rapid fire capturing the exact moment her marriage collapsed. Gasps filled the room as she pushed the signed document back toward him. Mark's smirk widened. To the crowd, it looked like triumph. To him, it felt like victory. "Thank you, Sarah," he said smoothly, tucking the papers back into his leather folder. "Now we can both move on. Best of luck with everything." His eyes flicked briefly to her belly, almost dismissively, as if the child she was about to bring into the world was nothing but a footnote in his story. The press swarmed him as he left. Microphones thrust into his face, flashes capturing his every movement. He walked out like a man newly freed, already rehearsing the headlines. Prominent attorney ends marriage gracefully, focuses on future. But Sarah, still lying there, chest heaving, her heart in shards, didn't crumble. She pressed her palm to her stomach, feeling the tiny kick of the life inside her. A flicker of strength surged through her veins. Because what Mark didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that Sarah wasn't as powerless as she seemed. Her aunts will have been read privately just weeks ago. The reclusive tech mogul had left her everything, not just wealth, but a patent so revolutionary it could change healthcare forever. Sarah had kept it buried, hidden from Mark's greedy eyes. And tonight, as the cameras recorded her humiliation, she made a silent vow. Mark thought he had won, but his victory was short-lived. Because while he left smug, believing he was free to marry into money and power, Sarah knew the truth. She already held more of both than he could ever imagine. Lydia touched her shoulder gently. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. That was cruel, what he just did." Sarah blinked away the tears, her lips curving into the faintest, most fragile smile. "It's okay, Lydia. Let him think he's won." Her eyes glinted, not with defeat, but with something Mark had forgotten she had. Resolve. The cameras had caught the tears. The world would see the broken wife, abandoned in labor. But in her heart, Sarah was already crafting her comeback. Mark had just declared war. He just didn't know Sarah had an army waiting in the shadows. The hospital room was quiet now. The chaos of the press had faded, and Mark's polished shoes were long gone from the hallways. All that remained was the steady hum of machines, the faint cries of newborns from down the corridor, and Sarah, exhausted, pale, but still fighting to keep her heart from collapsing in on itself. Her baby girl slept in a clear bassinet beside her bed, wrapped tightly in a hospital blanket. Sarah watched her chest rise and fall, the tiny sighs that escaped her lips, and for the first time since the betrayal, Sarah felt a thread of calm. She reached for her nightstand drawer and pulled out a plain manila envelope. It looked ordinary, even forgettable, but inside it was the secret that had kept her standing while Mark tried to break her. As she ran her fingers across the flap, her mind drifted back to the last time she saw her Aunt Eleanor. Eleanor Price was not the kind of woman who smiled easily. She had built her empire in silence, away from society dinners and magazine covers. Some called her eccentric, others called her ruthless. To Sarah, she was something else entirely, mysterious, intimidating, yet quietly protective in a way Sarah hadn't recognized until much later. The memory was sharp. Sarah had been 22, fresh out of nursing school, when she last visited her aunt's sprawling estate. She remembered stepping into the cavernous study, its shelves stacked with books on engineering, AI, and medical journals, its windows closed against the world. Eleanor, thin and sharp-eyed, had been seated at her desk, tapping away at a prototype design on her computer. "You chose nursing," Eleanor had said without looking up. Her voice was low, clipped, almost disappointed. "Yes," Sarah had answered softly, expecting a lecture. But Eleanor had turned then, studying her. "You chose compassion over ambition." "Good. The world has enough greedy people, not enough healers." Sarah never forgot those words. Years later, after Eleanor's passing, the lawyers had gathered Sarah in a sterile office. The reading of the will had shocked everyone. While distant cousins and charities received polite sums, the lion's share, the patents, the estate, the intellectual property of an AI project whispered about in tech circles, was left to Sarah. The lawyer had handed her the very envelope she now clutched in the hospital bed. Inside was a handwritten note, penned in Eleanor's sharp, slanted script. "Sarah, you understand what most never will. Technology without compassion is just greed with wires. Use this patent not to make money, but to heal. Not for vengeance, but for legacy. You are the only one I trust to carry this forward. Do not let anyone, especially those who see only profit, touch it. It belongs to you. and to the world you will change with it. At the time, Sarah had barely understood the scope of what she inherited. The patent described an AI system capable of predictive diagnostics, technology that could revolutionize healthcare, prevent diseases before they took root, and save hospitals billions. Industry insiders estimated its value in the tens of billions. Mark, of course, knew nothing about it. Sarah had been careful. She kept the documents in a safety deposit box, never breathing a word. She had seen the greed in his eyes too many times to make the mistake of trusting him with something this powerful. Now, lying in her hospital bed, her baby sleeping beside her, Sarah pulled out a worn notebook. Her hands shook, not from fear, but from a sheer weight of possibility. On the first page, she sketched the outline of an idea, a healthcare startup powered by her aunt's AI, built not for profit, but for people. She imagined a network of clinics that could predict illnesses before they turned fatal. She pictured saving the very hospital she worked at, the one she loved, the one she now knew was sinking under debt. Her pen scratched furiously across the page, her exhaustion forgotten. She wasn't just a nurse anymore. She wasn't just a mother. She was the heir to a vision that could transform medicine. A soft cry from the bassinet pulled her back. She lifted her daughter, cradling her against her chest. The baby's warmth steadied her, grounded her. "This is for you," Sarah whispered, pressing a kiss to her daughter's forehead. "For us. For everyone who's ever been left behind." The baby's tiny fingers curled around her mother's thumb, and Sarah felt the weight of her aunt's words settle into her bones. Use it for healing, not greed. Outside her hospital room, reporters were still buzzing, waiting for the next humiliating headline. Mark was likely toasting his so-called freedom with colleagues, already plotting his next marriage into wealth. But Sarah wasn't thinking about Mark anymore. She was thinking about her aunt, her daughter, her hospital, about the empire she was about to build, not of power for its own sake, but of compassion. She closed the notebook, slid the envelope back into the drawer, and lay back on her pillow, her baby against her chest. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to smile. Mark thought he had buried her tonight. But Sarah Daniels was not buried. She was planted, and soon she would rise. The city skyline glittered outside the penthouse windows as Mark raised his glass of scotch, his laughter booming across the mahogany-paneled lounge. He was surrounded by men who looked just like him, sharp suits, expensive watches, smug grins. It was the kind of room where fortunes were decided with a handshake and lives were ruined with a whisper. "You see," Mark said, loosening his tie just enough to look relaxed but still powerful. "Divorce was the best business decision I ever made. I finally cut the dead weight." Sarah? She was a nurse with nothing. Sweet, maybe, but nothing more. He smirked, savoring the chuckles that rippled through the room. "Now, I've got my sights on bigger things. Deals that'll make what I earn now look like pocket change." The men nodded, some impressed, others wary. Mark was clever, no doubt about it, but his arrogance filled the room like cigar smoke, thick, choking, impossible to ignore. But even as he bragged, small murmurs had begun weaving their way through the city's elite circles. Whispers about Sarah, about her aunt, about a fortune that might have quietly passed into Sarah's hands. Mark laughed it off when he first heard it, but the seed was planted. And Mark was not a man who could ignore a seed once it was sown. At the same time, miles away, Sarah sat in the soft glow of her modest apartment, rocking her newborn gently in her arms. The hum of the city outside was faint, softened by the warmth of the little cocoon she was creating for herself and her child. Her body was still healing, her mind still adjusting to motherhood, but her heart was on fire. The patent, the note, the vision of what could be. Her aunt had left her more than wealth. She had left her a mission. On the coffee table sat a notebook filled with Sarah's scribbles. Ideas for how to use the AI technology to predict diseases earlier, streamline patient care, and save hospitals from drowning in bureaucracy. Every page pulsed with possibility. "You're going to grow up in a better world," she whispered to her baby, tracing a finger across his tiny hand. "Not because of money, but because of what we can build." Still, The thought of Mark lingered. His shadow stretched over her even now. She knew, deep in her bones, that if he ever discovered the truth about the inheritance, he would not hesitate to take it, or her, down. Mark, of course, was already on the hunt. He sat at his sleek desk late one night, phone pressed to his ear, his voice cold and deliberate. I don't care what it takes. Dig in her life. Every corner. Every drawer. I want to know if she's hiding something. And if she is, he paused, his eyes narrowing as he swirled the ice in his glass. Bring it to me before she even realizes you've found it. The investigator on the other end gave a curt nod, though Mark couldn't see it. Understood. Mark hung up, leaned back, and smiled. He always got what he wanted. But Sarah wasn't alone anymore. At the hospital, in the quiet hours between shifts, she had found an unlikely ally in Dr. Alex Rivera. Alex had been a fixture in her professional life for years. A steady, compassionate doctor who treated his patients with the same respect he showed his colleagues. Unlike Mark, Alex never looked through her. He saw her. One evening, after checking on a patient together, Alex lingered in the hallway as Sarah gathered her notes. You've been different lately, he said gently, his dark eyes studying her face. Focused, determined, almost lit up, but also guarded. Is everything okay? Sarah hesitated. The secret burned on her tongue. She couldn't tell him everything. Not yet. But something in his voice, the way he didn't press, made her feel safe enough to let a little slip. I've been thinking a lot about the future, she said, her voice low but steady. About how broken the system is. How many lives could be saved if we just had the right tools? Alex smiled, not with amusement, but with understanding. That's the Sarah I know, always trying to fix the world, even when it's falling apart around you. She met his gaze, and for a fleeting moment, she saw something there, admiration, respect, maybe more. That night, Sarah walked home with a rare sense of hope. For the first time in years, someone stood beside her without judgment or greed. Someone who believed in her, not in what she had or could give. But as Sarah's alliances grew, so did Mark's suspicions. The whispers about Sarah's inheritance reached him again, this time louder, harder to dismiss. And now, the image of her as a nurse with nothing began to crack in his mind. What if she wasn't nothing? What if she was holding out on him? Mark's lips curled into a sly grin. Well, then, he muttered to himself, this is going to be fun. And with that, the game shifted. Sarah had secrets worth billions. Mark had power and ruthlessness. And somewhere in the middle, Alex had quietly stepped into Sarah's corner. The storm was coming, one secret, one lie, one alliance at a time. The fluorescent lights flickered in the hospital's main hallway, casting long, tired shadows across the scuffed linoleum. Sarah knew the building's flaws as well as she knew her own reflection. The creaking elevators, the peeling paint in the maternity wing, the outdated equipment that sometimes sputtered mid-shift. But beneath all that wear and tear was a place that had saved lives for decades, a place that had been her second home. So when she overheard the administrators whispering about bankruptcy in the staff lounge, her stomach dropped like stone. They can't close us down, she whispered, clutching the edge of the counter as she tried to steady her breath. One of the nurses looked up, pity heavy in her eyes. They're saying the debts are too high, Sarah. We'll be lucky if the hospital lasts another month. The thought of the hospital's doors closing, patients with no place to go, staff scattered like dust in the wind, was unbearable. Sarah had stitched wounds in these halls, held hands of mothers in labor, fought for patients when no one else would. To her, this wasn't just a building. It was a lifeline for an entire community. But the real dagger came later that night. As Sarah flipped through the evening news, she froze at the sight of Mark, her ex, smug as ever, sitting across from a polished anchor. Mr. Daniels, as legal counsel for the consortium purchasing the hospital's debt. What's your view on this? The anchor asked. Mark leaned back in his chair, his expression dripping with false concern. It's always tragic when an institution can't keep up with the modern healthcare market. But let's be honest, the hospital was already failing. My clients simply believe in making space for innovation. Sarah's hands clenched into fists. Innovation? He wasn't saving anything. He was gutting the hospital so his clients could swoop in like vultures and buy it for scraps. He was smiling, celebrating, while everything she loved was being strangled. That night, Sarah sat alone at her kitchen table, her newborn asleep in the next room. The baby's soft breaths rose and fell, a reminder of what truly mattered. She stared down at the patent folder, her inheritance, her secret weapon, and something inside her snapped. No more hiding, she whispered to herself. If Mark wants to play dirty, fine, but I'm not letting him destroy the only place that ever gave me purpose. 2 weeks later, the hospital's auditorium buzzed with whispers and flashing cameras. Reporters, staff, and even former patients filled the seats, unsure why they had been called to this emergency press conference. The curtain at the front parted, and Sarah stepped onto the stage. Gone was the quiet nurse in scrubs who everyone underestimated. She wore a sleek navy suit, her posture tall, her eyes blazing with conviction. For a heartbeat, the room went silent. Then the clicks of cameras exploded. "My name is Sarah," she began, her voice steady but brimming with emotion. "For years, I worked within this hospital. I watched it fight for patients it couldn't always afford to save. I watched it crumble under the weight of broken systems. And now, I'm here to say this hospital will not fall. Not on my watch." She placed the folder on the podium and opened it slowly, deliberately, the way her aunt had once opened doors to new worlds. "My late aunt entrusted me with a revolutionary AI patent," Sarah continued, the words reverberating across the room. "Technology that has the power to cut costs, diagnose faster, and save lives more efficiently than ever before. And today, I am announcing the launch of a new healthcare startup, one that will partner with this hospital, modernize it, and keep its doors open for the people who need it most." Gasps swept through the audience. One reporter shot up from his seat. "Ms. Sarah, are you saying you're the sole heir to the late tech mogul Evelyn Drake?" Sarah lifted her chin, the weight of the truth finally setting her free. "Yes, and I intend to honor her legacy by using this gift for healing, not greed." The room erupted. Flashes, shouts, the chaos of history being rewritten in real time. Back in his high-rise office, Mark watched the broadcast with a glass of whiskey slipping from his hand, shattering on the floor. His jaw tightened as he listened to the woman he once mocked, a nurse with nothing, now stand before the world as a billionaire innovator. "She played me," he muttered, pacing the length of his office. "She had it all along." His phone buzzed with calls from clients, furious and panicked. Sarah had not just embarrassed him. She had pulled the rug out from under an entire empire he was trying to build. For the first time in years, Mark felt something he didn't recognize: fear. Meanwhile, Sarah stood on the hospital steps after the press conference, the cold air biting her cheeks. Reporters shouted her name. Microphones thrust toward her, but she barely heard them. Instead, she felt a quiet hand slip into hers. She turned to see Dr. Alex, his eyes warm, proud, steady. "You did it," he said softly. "You just changed everything." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes, but this time, they weren't from grief or rage. They were from relief, from hope, from the first taste of victory. For the first time in a long time, Sarah wasn't just surviving. She was leading, and the world had just found its newest powerhouse. Mark had built his career on lies polished into truths, but this time, his desperation stank through every polished word. For the past week, he had thrown everything at Sarah, fabricated scandals about her being unfit to run a company, whispers that she was reckless with money, even a rumor that she had falsified her nursing credentials. The tabloids ate it up for a day. But then something curious happened. Instead of Sarah shrinking into the shadows, she seemed to grow brighter. Her calm statements to the press, her quiet dignity, her refusal to sling mud back. It made Mark's noise sound hollow. And yet, Mark wasn't finished. "Gentlemen," he said smoothly to the investors gathered in the sleek boardroom, "let's finalize this. Once we sign, the hospital becomes ours. No delays, no surprises." The boardroom was a temple of power, mahogany table, panoramic windows overlooking the city, a skyline of ambition stretching toward the clouds. Men in tailored suits leaned back in leather chairs, nodding, their pens poised to ink the deal that would gut the hospital and turn it into prime real estate. Mark's smile was a blade. He had won, or so he thought. The doors swung open. Every head turned. Sarah stepped inside. She wasn't in scrubs this time, nor the modest dress she wore at the press conference. She wore a tailored white blazer over black silk, her hair swept into a clean bun, her posture radiating steel. She wasn't here as a nurse or a betrayed wife. She was here as a force. Mark's smirk faltered. What the hell is she doing here? He hissed under his breath. Sarah walked the length of the room, her heels clicking like a gavel against marble. She stopped at the head of the table, directly across from Mark. Her eyes locked with his, steady and unblinking. "Good morning, gentlemen," she said, her voice clear, composed, carrying in the cavernous room. "I believe I deserve a seat at this table." Mark laughed, sharp and dismissive. "This is a private meeting, Sarah. Nurses don't negotiate billion-dollar deals." A murmur rippled through the room, but Sarah didn't flinch. She set a slim folder on the table and slid it forward, the way a dealer might lay down an ace. "With respect, I'm not here as a nurse," she said. "I'm here as the owner of a proprietary AI patent valued in the billions. And as the financial backer prepared to outbid every single one of you." The air thickened. One of the board members leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. "Is this true?" Sarah opened the folder, revealing sleek documents stamped with legal seals, her aunt's signature still haunting the pages like a ghostly ally. She flipped through with precision. "Proprietary algorithms for predictive diagnostics," she explained, her voice growing stronger. "Proven to reduce hospital costs by 30% and improve survival rates by 40%. With this technology, not only can this hospital survive, it can set the standard for healthcare nationwide." Silence. Mark's fists clenched beneath the table. "This is a stunt," he snapped. "She doesn't have the capital. She's bluffing." Sarah's lips curved. Not a smile, but something sharper. "Am I?" At that cue, the double doors opened again. Two suited representatives from a major venture capital firm entered, nodding to Sarah as they placed a signed letter of financial commitment on the table. The sum printed in bold was staggering, enough not only to cover the hospital's debts, but to fuel its rebirth. Gasps broke out around the table. Pens stilled. Eyes darted between Sarah and the investors. One board member, a silver-haired man with a skeptical frown, finally spoke. "Mr. Daniels' offer ensures liquidation and short-term gain. Ms. Sarah's ensures innovation and longevity. Gentlemen, are we truly blind to the future staring us in the face?" Mark slammed his palm on the table, the sound cracking like thunder. "She's my ex-wife. She's unstable, she—" "Enough, Mark," Sarah cut in, her voice calm but commanding. She met his eyes, unshaken by his fury. "You underestimated me once. Don't make the mistake of doing it again." For a moment, time held its breath. Then, slowly, one board member after another began nodding. Hands lifted. A vote. When the last hand rose, Mark knew he had lost. The chairman cleared his throat. "The board sides with Ms. Sarah. Effective immediately, she is recognized as the controlling partner in the hospital's future." Mark's face drained of color, his jaw slack. "You can't." But his words were drowned by the swell of applause. Cameras had already slipped into the room, catching the moment. The woman once humiliated in labor, now triumphing in the boardroom, her ex-husband's empire crumbling in front of her. Sarah gathered her papers, her movements calm and deliberate, before turning to leave. But just before she reached the door, she glanced back at Mark. "This isn't about you anymore," she said softly, so only he could hear. "It never was." She walked out, the boardroom alive with excitement, leaving Mark behind in his crumbling kingdom. Outside, the flash of cameras blinded her. Microphones thrust forward, questions shouted. But through it all, Sarah felt lighter, stronger. For the first time, she wasn't just reacting to betrayal. She was leading her own story, and the world was finally watching. The cameras were already rolling when Sarah stepped onto the stage. The press conference had been teased for days, and by now the anticipation was electric. Reporters packed the hall shoulder to shoulder, microphones tilted forward like weapons, flashes exploding in rapid-fire bursts. Sarah didn't flinch. She stood at the podium, white blazer crisp under the lights, her newborn's photo tucked inside her folder like a secret talisman. The same press that had once feasted on her humiliation was about to witness something very different. "Thank you for being here," she began, her voice calm, steady, carrying a gravity that silenced the room. For too long, powerful people have believed they can manipulate, deceive, and profit at the expense of others. Today, we put an end to that. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. Sarah lifted a sheet of paper from her folder, her hands steady as stone. "This is documentation of fraudulent contracts, drawn up and approved by Mark Langston, my former husband, and his associates. Contracts designed to inflate debt, bankrupt community hospitals, and sell them off for pennies to corporate buyers." Gasps broke across the hall like dominoes. She slid another paper into view, this one projected onto the big screen behind her. Signatures, dates, numbers that couldn't be spun away. "And this," Sarah continued, her voice sharpening like glass, "is evidence of client manipulation. Families coerced into settlements, small businesses destroyed through legal loopholes, patients denied care because of fine print he drafted himself." The silence in the room was suffocating. A hand shot up from the press pit. "Ms. Sarah, are you saying Mark Daniel knowingly defrauded his clients?" Sarah didn't blink. "Yes. He built his empire on betrayal. Personal, professional, and financial. I know because I lived it." Her words landed like a hammer, and for a moment, the room itself seemed to lean in closer. Across town, Mark was watching from a private lounge at his firm, a tumbler of scotch clutched too tightly in his hand. "She wouldn't dare," he muttered, though his voice cracked with doubt. But then the camera zoomed in on Sarah's face, calm, fearless, untouchable, and dread pooled in his chest. He knew she wasn't bluffing. She had the receipts. "Turn it off," he barked at the assistant, fumbling with the remote. But it was too late. The phones of every partner in the room were already buzzing with alerts. Back at the conference, Sarah pressed on. "The same press who filmed me signing divorce papers in a hospital bed," she said, her voice trembling just slightly with raw memory, "is now filming this. The truth, that the man who accused me of neglect was neglecting his clients, his oaths, and his humanity. This is no longer just my story. It's every story of every person he stepped on for profit." The room erupted, questions shouted, cameras flashing like a storm. Sarah raised her hand, and the chaos simmered down. "I didn't come here for revenge," she said, softer now, more vulnerable. "I came here to protect this hospital, this community, and the legacy of compassion my aunt entrusted me with. What Mark tried to destroy has only made me stronger, and I will not let greed win." The applause was deafening, raw, unplanned, a wave of relief, vindication, even admiration. Mark stormed into his firm's boardroom, his face crimson. "Damage control now. We'll sue her for defamation." But the faces around the table were cold, closed off. One of his senior partners slid a resignation letter across the table. "Your name is Poison Mark?" the man said flatly. "We can't stand with you." Mark's throat went dry. You're abandoning me? After everything I built?" Another partner looked up from his phone, his tone icy. "You didn't build. You conned. And now it's collapsing in real time." One by one, his allies pushed their chairs back, leaving him in silence. The scotch glass slipped from his hand and shattered across the carpet. For the first time, Mark realized he wasn't in control. He was the story now, and the cameras were eating him alive. Back at the conference, Sarah stepped away from the podium, her folder under her arm, her eyes burning with quiet fire. As she exited the stage, Dr. Alex was waiting in the wings, his smile proud, his hand steady on her shoulder. "You just buried him," Alex whispered. "No," Sarah replied softly. "He buried himself. I just gave the world a shovel." The press swarmed, headlines already forming, news alerts lighting up across the city. The woman once branded as broken now stood at the center of a revolution. And Mark, once the untouchable corporate shark, was bleeding out in public view. For Sarah, it wasn't revenge that tasted sweet. It was justice. And the world, finally, was on her side. The rain had stopped just hours before the press conference. The city was still glistening, water shimmering on the streets like tiny shards of glass reflecting the sunrise. Outside the hospital, once teetering on the edge of bankruptcy, a sea of cameras and flashing lights had gathered. Reporters leaned over barricades, microphones thrust forward, their voices buzzing with speculation. And then the glass doors slid open. Sarah emerged. She was holding her newborn daughter, wrapped in a soft cream blanket, her tiny face peeking out from beneath the fabric. At Sarah's side was Alex, steady and protective, his hand resting lightly on her back, as though to remind her she wasn't facing this storm alone. The crowd fell into silence. Sarah, once dismissed as nothing more than an assistant, once humiliated in front of these very kinds of people, now stood with a quiet power that needed no introduction. She walked up to the podium, her daughter nestled against her chest, and let the silence linger. It wasn't nervousness, it was control. The world was leaning in, and she made them wait. When she spoke, her voice was clear and warm, carrying the conviction of someone who had been through hell and returned stronger. Months ago, she began, her eyes scanning the crowd. This hospital was on the verge of collapse. Patients were turned away. Nurses worked double shifts without pay. Families prayed outside these doors, begging for care they couldn't afford. I know, because I was one of them. She paused, her throat tightening for a second. Alex gave her a reassuring squeeze, invisible to the cameras but felt deeply by her. But today, she glanced down at her daughter, then back at the cameras. We are starting something new. A foundation built not on profit, not on politics, but on compassion. It will be named in honor of my late aunt, the woman who raised me, who believed that every life, rich or poor, deserves dignity. Gasps rippled through the press. They knew about her aunt, but the dedication added a layer of intimacy they hadn't expected. This initiative, Sarah continued, will not only keep this hospital alive, it will expand affordable healthcare access across the city. No more locked doors. No more broken families. No more hopeless nights in emergency rooms where the first question is not, how can we help? But, how will you pay? The crowd erupted into clapping, though the press was trained not to show bias. Some reporters couldn't help it. They were swept up in the moment. Sarah shifted slightly, bouncing her daughter gently. This, she looked down at the baby, her eyes softening, is the reason we fight. This is not about revenge. She paused, and the silence deepened. Cameras zoomed closer. This is legacy. Click. Flash. Shouts from reporters broke the spell. Sarah, what do you say to those who claim you only did this to humiliate Mark Harrison? Do you plan to run for office after this? How do you respond to critics who say healthcare can't survive on compassion alone? Sarah held up a hand, her expression calm but resolute. Let me be clear. This is not about politics. This is about people. For too long, greed has dictated who lives and who dies. That ends today. The words cut like a blade. And in the back row, someone murmured, Mark's finished. And indeed he was. Just blocks away, Mark Harrison sat in his penthouse, except it wasn't his anymore. Boxes lined the hallways, movers stripping away the life he had built on arrogance and power. His bank accounts were frozen, his allies gone, his name synonymous with scandal. On the television across the room, Sarah's speech played live. He muttered under his breath, a glass of whiskey trembling in his hand. That should have been me. But even as he said it, he knew the truth. Sarah had built something real, something untouchable, and he was just a footnote in her story. Back at the hospital, Sarah concluded her speech. This foundation is for every mother who sat in a waiting room praying her child would make it through the night. For every father who worked 3 jobs and still couldn't afford the medicine his wife needed. For every nurse, Every doctor, every soul who deserves better. Together, we will heal. The applause was thunderous this time, breaking the formality of the moment. Nurses leaned out of windows, waving. Patients cheered from wheelchairs. Even hardened reporters found themselves clapping. Alex leaned toward her, whispering just loud enough for her to hear. "You did it. You turned pain into power." She smiled, tears welling in her eyes, but not falling. Not today. Today was not for tears. With the cameras still flashing, she stepped down from the podium, holding her daughter close. The baby shifted slightly, opening her eyes as if sensing the weight of history around her. Sarah kissed her forehead. The press shouted questions, but Sarah didn't look back. She didn't need to. She walked forward, strong, steady, radiant. A woman who had been underestimated, broken, dismissed. A woman who had been slapped in front of the world and turned that humiliation into a revolution. The final image broadcast across the world was not of Mark Harrison's downfall, nor of political chaos, nor of the scandal that had rocked the Senate. It was Sarah, a young mother, a leader, walking away from the flashing cameras with her daughter in her arms. Not a symbol of revenge, a symbol of legacy.